A man who truly embodies masculine strength understands the value of his presence. He knows that who he is, what he brings to the table, and the energy he carries cannot be taken lightly. His time is not something to be wasted. His attention is not something to be handed out like loose change, and his presence is not something that anyone can take for granted. When he walks into a room, there is a certain weight to him, a certain gravity that draws people closer. That gravity does not come from chasing. It comes from recognizing that his presence already holds value without the need for pursuit. He does not convince, he does not beg, he does not run after anyone, because he knows his presence is the gift. A masculine man understands that to chase is to shift power. The one who chases says through his actions, "You are above me, you are the prize, and I am seeking your validation." But he does not live life through validation. He validates himself by the way he lives, by the way he handles his responsibilities, by the way he invests in his goals, and by the way he respects himself. He knows that if someone does not see his value when he stands before them, chasing will never make them see it. In fact, it will only lower him in their eyes. That's why his strength lies not in pursuit, but in stillness, not in running after, but in knowing that if someone cannot recognize the worth of his presence, they were never meant to have it. When a man values his presence, he values his energy. He will not drain himself to feed the ego of someone who doesn't appreciate him. He would rather keep his distance than compromise his dignity. He knows that to be truly masculine is to understand that his time is his currency, his presence is his wealth, and his absence is his power. The moment he withholds his presence, others realize just how much of a void he leaves behind. That void is the proof of his value. And so, instead of chasing, he simply exists in his strength, letting those who cannot see it lose the very thing they once took for granted. That is the essence of valuing presence. It is never wasted where it is not honored. Silence is not weakness. It is the loudest statement a man can make. In a world where people constantly try to prove themselves with words, reactions, and desperate attempts to hold on, silence stands as a mark of power. When a man chooses to disappear instead of chasing, he is communicating something far greater than any argument could ever express. His absence says, "I don't need to fight for a place where I'm not valued." It speaks with a finality that words could never carry. Silence unsettles, because it cannot be argued with, cannot be reasoned with, cannot be pulled into a debate. It lingers in the mind long after the man has walked away, leaving a question mark in the air that words could never leave behind. To remain silent requires strength, because the instinct to explain, to defend, to prove worth often takes control of weaker men. But the one who understands silence knows that true respect is never gained through pleading. When he chooses not to chase, when he withdraws his energy, he sends a clear message that he is not dependent on validation or attention. Silence becomes his armor. It shields him from being dragged into unnecessary drama, from being diminished by begging, and from being trapped in situations that rob him of his dignity. In this way, his disappearance is not escape. It is strategy, it is clarity, it is self-command. Those who once overlooked him feel the echo of that silence. It gnaws at them, because human nature always notices absence more than presence. Words can be dismissed, explanations can be ignored, but silence cannot be forgotten. It forces the other side to confront the truth of what they have lost, to sit in the emptiness of what they once had but did not honor. That is why disappearing is so powerful. It is not a reaction born out of weakness. It is a choice that demonstrates control. In silence, he holds all the power. He does not chase because he knows that chasing would only shift the balance and make him appear smaller than he truly is. Instead, he lets the absence speak for him. He allows the quiet to become a reminder of what he brought into someone's life. Silence, when chosen with intention, has a voice louder than any words. And when a man disappears, that silence echoes far longer than any pursuit ever could. Boundaries are the mark of a man who refuses to trade his dignity for temporary attention. When respect is missing, he does not plead for it. He does not negotiate for it. and he certainly does not chase after it. Instead, he draws a line and walks away. This is not an act of bitterness, it is an act of strength. A man who sets boundaries understands that without them, he becomes vulnerable to manipulation, to games, and to cycles of disrespect that slowly strip him of his worth. Boundaries are not walls that shut people out, they are filters that protect him from situations that do not honor who he is. By disappearing instead of clinging, he proves that his sense of self is stronger than any need for validation. Desperation weakens. It creates imbalance, making one person beg while the other decides how much they are willing to give. A masculine man will never allow himself to be placed in such a position because he knows that the moment he tolerates disrespect, he teaches others how to treat him. He will not let himself become the man who waits for breadcrumbs of affection, nor the man who excuses behavior that cuts into his dignity. Instead, his boundaries keep him grounded. They remind him that his value does not depend on how hard he chases, but on how firmly he stands when others fail to meet him at his level. Walking away is not a loss, it is preservation. By disappearing, he saves his energy for connections that are real, for relationships that flow without constant struggle, for people who can recognize his worth without needing to be convinced. His boundaries free him from the trap of trying to change someone's perception and instead allow him to move where his presence is naturally respected. It is not about punishment, it is about alignment. He does not disappear to teach a lesson, but because his standards leave no room for disrespect. This strength often confuses those who expect him to chase. They assume he will bend, they assume he will beg, but instead he becomes unreachable. That unreachability is what sets him apart because it shows he values peace over chaos, self-respect over attachment, boundaries over desperation, and in the end, it is those very boundaries that make his presence worth something. For what is rare, protected, and not easily given always holds the highest value. Disappearance is not driven by pride, it is born from discipline. A man who embodies true masculinity does not vanish out of ego, but out of self-mastery. He has trained himself to understand that emotions, while powerful, are not meant to control him. He feels deeply, but he does not let those feelings dictate desperate actions. Instead of reacting with pursuit, he responds with restraint. This restraint is the essence of his strength. It shows that he does not need to force connections. He does not need to prove himself through endless effort, and he does not allow rejection or neglect to diminish who he is. By stepping back, he displays mastery over the one thing most people cannot control, their emotions. Ego seeks to dominate, but discipline seeks balance. Ego says, I will disappear to hurt you. Discipline says, I will disappear because my peace is worth more than your attention. That is the difference. When a man disappears out of ego, he is still entangled, still reacting to the situation, still giving power to the other. But when he disappears out of self-mastery, he is choosing himself without bitterness, without anger, without the need to prove a point. His absence is not about punishment. It is about alignment with his own values. He knows when to engage and when to retreat, and he does so with calm certainty, not emotional chaos. This discipline creates a rare kind of strength. While many are slaves to their impulses, he shows that his actions are not dictated by temporary feelings. He does not chase because he understands that chasing is often nothing more than an emotional reaction to fear of loss. Instead, he welcomes the possibility of loss as a natural part of life. He would rather lose someone than lose his self-respect. That is why disappearing is such a powerful statement. It reveals that he values long-term dignity over short-term comfort. Mastery over emotions is not coldness, it is clarity. It allows him to love without becoming dependent, to connect without becoming consumed, and to walk away without collapsing. He does not see disappearing as giving up, but as choosing himself when the situation no longer reflects mutual respect. This calm withdrawal, rooted in discipline, makes his presence even more powerful. For when a man shows he cannot be controlled by emotion or desperation, he proves that his strength is not in chasing, it is in mastering himself. There is a magnetic pull in absence that presence alone can never create. A man who refuses to chase understands this truth deeply. When he steps back, when he disappears, instead of running after someone, he creates a space that cannot be ignored. That space becomes a mirror reflecting the value of what is missing. Constant pursuit dulls desire, but absence sharpens it. It stirs curiosity, it awakens questions, and it forces the other person to confront what life feels like without his energy. This is why his silence and disappearance are often more powerful than any effort to convince or to chase. Mystery has weight, and he uses it with precision. Human nature craves what it cannot easily have. The more available someone makes themselves, the easier it is for others to take that presence for granted. But the masculine man refuses to make himself common. His attention, his energy, and his presence are rare, and rarity creates attraction. When he disappears, it is not to play games, it is to preserve the sacredness of his value. He knows that if someone truly desires him, they will feel the void of his absence more than the comfort of his pursuit. In this way, he becomes unforgettable, not because he clung, but because he let go. Mystery has always been more alluring than certainty. A man who is always chasing becomes predictable, and predictability kills desire. But when he disappears, he introduces uncertainty. He shows that his world does not revolve around anyone else, that he has his own life, his own path, his own priorities. That independence draws people toward him more strongly than constant attention ever could. It communicates that being with him is not a guarantee, but a privilege that must be earned and appreciated. This magnetism is not about manipulation, it is about balance. He does not disappear to trick or to control, but to remind others that his energy is not infinite. By stepping back, he reclaims his own power, and in doing so, often ignites a stronger pull from the very people who once overlooked him. The paradox is simple: the less he chases, the more he is chased. The less he clings, the more others want to hold on. His absence speaks a language of desire that words never could. And in the end, it is that mysterious pull, the magnetic force of disappearing, that makes him impossible to forget. Energy is the most valuable currency a man has, and where he invests it determines the quality of his life. A man who refuses to chase understands this principle better than most. Instead of wasting his strength pursuing someone who does not see his worth, he redirects that energy toward himself, his vision, and his growth. This redirection is not avoidance. It is elevation. He knows that every moment spent chasing is a moment stolen from his purpose, from his discipline, from the future he is building. So he chooses wisely. He pours his focus into becoming, not begging. He invests in creating, not convincing. He strengthens himself rather than exhausting himself for someone who never intended to value him. By refusing to chase, he shifts the entire dynamic of his life. He is no longer a man defined by what he is trying to get from others, but by what he is giving to himself. His growth becomes his obsession, his purpose becomes his companion, and his progress becomes his pursuit. This makes him naturally magnetic, because people are drawn to those who move forward with direction and confidence. Instead of asking to be chosen, he becomes the one who chooses. Instead of chasing, he builds. And what he builds, whether it be his mind, his body, his craft, or his vision, creates a presence far stronger than any pursuit ever could. Energy that is redirected into self-improvement transforms him from within. It sharpens his discipline, it deepens his wisdom, and it strengthens his character. Others can feel this shift. They see the difference between a man who spends his time chasing fleeting validation and a man who invests in lasting value. One is forgettable, the other is unforgettable. This is why disappearing holds so much power, because the energy once wasted in pursuit is now concentrated in becoming more. What many fail to understand is that attraction is not built through overextension, but through independence and progress. A man on his path, dedicated to his own evolution, will always stand out more than the one who abandons his direction to chase someone else's approval. By investing in himself, he makes his presence felt even when he is absent. His growth echoes louder than his words, his progress speaks louder than his pursuit. And in time, the very energy he redirected becomes the reason others are drawn toward him. That is the true strength of not chasing, turning absence into advancement and rejection into redirection. The essence of true masculinity is not in the chase, but in the choice to walk away with dignity intact. Disappearing is not defeat, it is power. It is the quiet declaration that respect cannot be negotiated, that energy cannot be wasted, and that worth cannot be diminished by neglect. When he chooses absence over desperation, silence over pleading, boundaries over weakness, and growth over validation, he becomes untouchable. His strength is not measured by how hard he runs after what slips away, but by how firmly he stands in who he is. And in that silence, in that disappearance, he becomes unforgettable, not because he chased, but because he never needed to.